Are you looking to build some nice terrain for your war games? Or maybe, like me, you bit off a little more than you can chew. Let's all learn from my inevitable mistakes as I smash together the last and largest building for this Mordheim board. More and more I'm realizing that my toxic trait is thinking I can, with the right amount of time, do just about anything, even though I rarely give myself any time really. This was very much the case when I told Rory at Ratboy Minis that I'd make a board for Mordheim, despite having never really made any terrain previously. Anyways, over the course of 3 weeks, I had put together this board, but needed one more giant building, like the massive manor on the hill. After creating a rough shape with paper, I then transferred this haphazard template to the XPS foam. This stuff is half an inch thick, so I doubled it up, creating an elevated first floor, something that would require stairs just to get to. I'd use this 3D printed cobblestone texture roller over most of the board. It's a quick and easy way to get that cobblestone effect, and being that I was running short on time, I used it here for the floor of this building. As I've been building this table, I've been iterating my process. I started with just using bricks, with nothing behind them, but that was a little too hole-filled and insubstantial feeling. So I moved to a heavier cardstock, which works great, but gets a bit flimsy over long stretches. So for this one I settled on foam core, which I'm able to find real cheap at the local dollar store. Everything in Mordheim is wrecked to some degree, so to stay on theme and for playability, I left the back of each building broken and open. Now, if it wasn't blatantly clear in all my other videos, I don't do a lot of planning, but when constructing these buildings, a little planning goes a long way. I built everything to a grid, keeping each level to 2.5 inches tall, which means they'll all line up with each other in any configuration. After cutting each wall out of the foam core, as well as any windows and doors, I glued them onto the base, using hot glue, which is quick and forms a strong bond. So the sort of support lumber on the roof was this 1/4 inch square balsa that I had. I was pretty loose with this, basing where and how many I put down really on the size of the cross timbers, aka coffee stir sticks. Gluing these cross pieces on with wood glue. I didn't worry about the spacing or gaps, choosing to lean into the rough and beat down theme of the setting. With all the walls in place, it was time to start laying some bricks. Because there was no base here, I attached the first row with hot glue, forming a strong bond quickly, then switching to PVA for the rest. All the bricks on this board I cut by hand, first cutting roughly 5mm strips off the 1/2 inch XPS sheet, then chopping those strips into bricks. I didn't measure anything, just kind of eyeballing the size, as I didn't want it too uniform. To break down the sharp edges and give them a little texture, I chucked them into a tin with a rock or two and gave it a good shake. When it came to the windows, I cut strips of this sculptor's mesh, hot gluing it to the outside of the walls. Then continued gluing the bricks in place. The interior was constructed much like the floor, 1/4 inch square balsa for support and coffee stir sticks for flooring. With all these buildings, I kept upper floors smaller than the floor below. This ensures that both are fully playable, as players can reach their hands everywhere. The old hand test, as it were. Once this place was thoroughly covered in bricks, it was time for some shingles. I roughly cut up some card for this. You could use a cereal box or similar. I stayed on theme for this channel by using an old Chemex filter box. To give these chunks of card a bit of character and wear, I curled them up a bit, trying to showcase the years of neglect and weathering. Once again, using PVA, I glued these to the roof, pretty haphazardly, sometimes in small groups of 2 or 3, other times in a few short rows. I didn't put too much thought into this, just kind of winging it. The final stage of construction was to create a plaster sort of texture on the interior walls. I simply brushed on some texture paint, fairly thinly, and let it dry. With construction done, it was time for paint. I used these two to paint it black with a heavy white zenithal. Then covered it all with this transparent raw umber ink. From this point on, it was all dollar store craft paint and cheap dollar store brushes. Because the coverage with this white is horrible at best, I didn't use any intermediate step with the bricks, simply dry brushing them with white, building more opacity in some areas and a whole lot less in others. With more time, I might have thinned down some greens and blues and washed them on in a few spots to add more variety and depth. But as it was, I'm not dissatisfied with the result. For the wood on the roof and flooring, I mixed some of the brown, yellow, and white directly on my dry brush palette with the dry brush, then brushed it on. Spending a little more time on the areas that would see more traffic or weather. After slapping some red paint onto the shingles and a little more dry brushing, I could add this to the now completed board. Well, nearly completed. See, I needed to honor the reason for this board into the Dungeon Fest. I quickly threw a couple of the posters for the event into Photoshop, scaled them to somewhere I thought made sense, and fired up the 2D printer. Slapped some Mod Podge down, then more over top to seal it, and now we've got a complete board. My first fully from scratch build. I'm fairly happy with it, particularly since it's my first. But now I've got so many ideas to make more thematically rich boards for all our games. This time though, maybe I'll give myself a little more time.